Alright, so what we're going to be looking at is I'm just going to show you the process of what some standard turns in Magic the Gathering could look like. We won't have an opponent, but I'm just going to show the actions of what, basically you could expect to do while playing a game against an opponent. We'll start off with the zones, talk about what the situation looks like, when we can play spells, when we cannot play spells, all these different things we'll be talking about. So there are multiple phases of Magic the Gathering. The first step is the untap phase, where we untap everything that we have, just to reset them so we can use them. After that, we have something called an upkeep. This is more of like a spot check. Some cards may say at the beginning of your upkeep, maybe you gain a life, or at the beginning of your upkeep, you have to sacrifice a creature, or at the beginning of your upkeep, you can do damage. Some cards may just say at the beginning of your upkeep, this needs to happen. It's just a nice way to trigger effects at the beginning of your turn to allow for more diverse gameplay. All right. After that, you draw your card. You draw one card per turn. All right. Then you have something called a main phase where you can play spells. Then you have combat phase where you can declare an offensive attack against your opponent. Then you have another main phase called your second main phase. And then from there, your step pretty much ends and you pass the turn to your opponent. So we'll go through 6 or 7 turns just to see what it could look like. So when we start the game, we start off with 7 cards. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now in the game, if you don't like your hand, for example, you get 0 lands, or it's a really, really bad hand, or you just don't think it's good stuff that you need to play, you may take your hand and shuffle it back into your library and draw 1 less card each time. And the current rules also say that you can look at the top card, you can decide to leave it on top or put it on the bottom. Alright? But I've preloaded the stack, so we will have a good hand. So I have 3 lands, 2 islands, and a mountain, so that's pretty good. This is a blue-red deck. Alright. I have that Careful Study sorcery that we saw before. I have a creature artifact called Hedron Scrabbler. It has ability Landfall. Whenever a land comes to the battlefield under my control, it gets +1/+1 till end of turn, so it gets a little bit more powerful. Cool. Explosive Impact. It's a lot of mana. Does 5 damage to a creature or player, so I can hit my opponent's life, or I can take care of one of their annoying creatures. And I also have an Aether Spellbomb sitting in my hand. Alright, so usually what happens is before you draw your hand, you and your opponent each roll the dice, and whoever goes first skips drawing the first draw for their turn. So we were going to go first in this just to see how the situation works. Alright, so it's my turn. I'm going first, so I don't draw a card, but I still have the untap. There's nothing to untap. I have the upkeep. Nothing is referencing upkeep, so I don't need to worry about that. And then the draw, which I skip because I am going first. For the rest of the game, I keep drawing cards. So the first thing I'm in is my first main phase. I can play lands, I can play artifacts, I can play instants, but I can play those whenever I want. I can play sorceries, I can play artifacts or creatures, or I could even play enchantments or planeswalkers. Basically anything but instants can only be played during my main phase. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a land, so I just put it into play. I'm going to tap it, turning it sideways, because I want to play this Careful Study. I want to see some more cards in my hand, and then I have to decide to get rid of 2 cards, and that's okay. So I'll play Careful Study. Alright, it gets played, so it gets put onto the field because my opponent can react to it. They can counter or destroy my effect, but let's say my opponent will not. Alright, when it resolves, it goes into my discard pile, also known as the graveyard, and then I play its ability. I draw 2 cards. Alright, and I'm looking at my hand, and I have to discard 2 cards. So in this situation, this Is-It key rune, I have enough mana for now. I might need it later, but I'm just going to leave it to be discarded. And then I'm also going to discard the Explosive Impact. Yeah, it's 5 damage and it's great, but I would need like 6 turns to play it unless I played this out and started accelerating how I use my mana. But I want to create an early offense to my opponent, so I'm going to discard them. Alright, so I can't play more lands because I can only play 1 per turn. But next turn, I have a bunch of options. I can play these 2, so I could play the Hedron Scrabbler, or I could play the Aether Spellbomb. Alright, but since I can't do anything, switch to combat, nothing happens because I have nothing to attack with, and then after that, I switch to my second main, nothing to do, and I pass the turn to my opponent. Alright, so we're going to wait for my opponent to move, and then we'll take another turn. Alright, so now it's my turn. I have to go through the steps, so it's untap, upkeep, draw, and then I move to the main phases. So I untap all of my lands or other permanents. I have upkeep, nothing talks about upkeep, so I don't need to worry about that. And then I draw a card. Alright, so I drew a mountain. So I can play one land per turn, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to play my mountain. Alright, now I have a choice to make. I have to play, or I can play one of these two cards. Alright, I can play Landfall. Whenever a land comes to the battlefield, it gets +1/+1 till end of turn, so that's not bad. It can make it stronger. Or I can play the Aether Spellbomb and maybe wait to manipulate the field early on in the game. I'm going to take an offense, and I'm going to play the Hedron Scrabbler. So I'm going to tap my 2 lands, turn them sideways, and this gets put onto the playing field. Alright, my opponent has the ability to react. He or she can play a card that destroys it or counters it or anything like that. The countering would mean as I'm playing it, it doesn't even come into play and it goes right to the graveyard. But we're going to keep it as it is right now. Alright, I switch to combat. When a creature first comes into play, it has something called Summoning Sickness. So the first turn a creature enters, you cannot attack with it. So he's not allowed to attack. That's completely fine. I'm done with my combat phase, so now I need to switch to my main phase. Nothing needs to happen, okay. And then I pass my turn to my opponent. Alright, so we'll wait for my turn again. Okay, so after my opponent went, it's now my turn. So the first thing I need to do is untap. Alright, then upkeep. Nothing's talking about that. We will see it a little bit later. And then I draw. Alright, so what I've drawn, a pretty popular card from old school Magic, Raven Familiar. It's a 1/2 flying. It has Echo 2 in blue. So at the beginning of your upkeep, if this came under your control since the beginning of your last upkeep, I have to sacrifice it unless I pay its Echo cost. So I kind of have to pay for this card twice if I want to keep it in play. But it's got an ability. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 into your hand and the rest on the bottom. Cool. So the first thing I can do during my main step is I'm going to play a land. Alright, and we need to be mindful that whenever a land comes into play, this guy gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So now he's a 2/2. Alright. One general strategy in Magic is to withhold information from your opponents as long as possible. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch from our first main stage to our combat stage immediately. I'm going to play some stuff later, but I would like to wait because I don't want my opponent to know that I have stuff in hand so that they can make a better informed decision. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to declare my Hedron Scrabbler as an attacker. So I'm going to say I'm switching to my combat phase, and I'm going to declare this as an attacker. So I turn it sideways to show that it's attacking. Alright, in this fictional situation, my opponent can block it, they cannot. Let's say they decide they don't want to block it because it's just 2 damage. You start the game with 20 life, so that's only 1/10 of your life. It's not too bad, but we'll see how it plays out a little bit later. Alright, so once combat's done, then I can start playing spells again. I'm going to play this Raven Familiar because I want to start getting extra cards from my deck into my hand. When it enters, I can look at the top 3 cards. 1 goes into my hand, and the others go on the bottom. So I can even get rid of stuff that I would have normally received. So to pay for it, I have to pay blue and 2 colorless. And I'll put it into play. Alright, so once it enters play, my opponent has the ability to counter it or to react to it. They're not going to. And I get to look at the top 3 cards. So 1, 2, 3. And I'll take a look at them. Let's see what we're working with. Alright. So, Battered Golem doesn't untap during my untap step. Whenever an artifact comes into play, I may untap it. That's cool, but I don't know how many artifacts I'm really running in this deck. I can look at my hand and say, okay, yeah, I have one in there, but what's going to happen after that? So I'm actually going to choose a different card, probably. Squeeze Toy, 1 mana, it can tap to prevent 1 damage to any creature. Yeah, that's kind of cool, but I don't really see my opponent putting too much of a damage-based offense. And then there's another card, Goblin Electromancer. Blue and red for a 2/2, so that's not really bad. Instants and sorcery spells that I cast cost colorless less to cast. I want this card. Alright, so these 2 have to go on the bottom, so I'm going to take this card, put it into my hand, and then these 2 get put to the bottom. I can also keep note that, hey, they're down in the bottom of my library, so I can't expect to get them, so I shouldn't plan a strategy around that. Alright. Taking a look, I still have my hand of stuff. I'm not going to play anything yet. But I also have lands in play, they're all tapped, I already did my combat phase, and my Raven Familiar, my new creature, can't attack. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass the turn to my opponent. Alright, so we're back on my turn. So the first thing I need to do is untap everything. Alright, and now here's the upkeep. This is where that Raven Familiar comes in. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, if it came under my control since the beginning of my last upkeep, I have to sacrifice it unless I pay its echo cost. I'm going to realize in this situation I got more stuff that I want to play. I don't really need to worry about this guy. He already did his job. So I'm going to fail to pay its echo cost. And what happens is I have to sacrifice it. So from play, it gets put into my graveyard. Alright, nothing else references upkeep, so I'm good to go. Another thing worth noting is if it's your turn, and you have all the creatures that have at the beginning of your upkeep effects, you can choose the order that they happen. So if you can choose one thing to happen first before another, and it benefits you, you get to choose that order, as long as they both reference the same point in the turn. Alright, upkeep is done. Draw step, I draw a card. And I got an inspiration. That's 3 and blue. It's an instant and lets target player draw 2 cards. Excellent. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start taking an offense now. I'm going to start dropping a lot of spells. So I'm going to take an island and play it. So now what we need to notice is this guy became a 2/2 again. Alright, so let's wait to play any spells, because once again I don't want my opponent to have any information. So I'm going to declare it as an attacker. I do 2 more damage to my opponent's life. Hey, now they're down to 16 life. Cool. Alright, I'm going to declare my combat is over. And now I can start playing on my second main step. I want to play this guy because what's going to happen is I'm going to be able to play Inspiration later on in the game for cheaper. So I'll have more resources at the end. So this costs a blue and a red. So blue, red, they both get turned. And Goblin Electromancer comes into play. He has Summoning Sickness, so there's really no point in playing him during my first main step either. Now, also, if my opponent had decided to block with one of their 2/2s, they would have traded off, and then I would have had another creature that can kind of deal the offensive from there. Alright, so I also want to play an Aether Spellbomb. Now, I have an island and a mountain left. I can pay whichever land I want, but taking a look at Aether Spellbomb, I might want to leave that blue mana open so I can use this ability just in case I needed to. So I'm going to pay red to play the Aether Spellbomb. And yes, you may play multiple spells per turn. As long as you have the mana to pay for it, you're fine. Okay, so we're going to switch to my opponent's turn, but we're going to note some effects based on this Aether Spellbomb. Okay, so right now it's my opponent's turn, and we're just going to make a situation where, we can kind of see the response situation based on the Aether Spellbomb. So my opponent is going to play a card called Famine. It's 3 black for a sorcery. It does 3 damage to each creature and each player. So now we're going to see some responses going on based on my opponent's move. So they play it, alright? It gets played down here, alright? I have nothing to combat it or to cancel it out, so I have to accept the damage. Both my creatures are going to die. That kind of disrupts my plan a little bit. I wanted my Goblin Electromancer to be out in play, so any instants or sorceries that I get will help me, especially this Inspiration. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to utilize my Aether Spellbomb. I'm going to pay the blue and sacrifice this to return a creature to its owner's hand. And I'm going to target my own Goblin Electromancer. So, my opponent played this. Before the spell resolves, I have a chance to react. I can say, in response, or before this resolves, I'm allowed to put an ability onto the game. So I'm going to pay blue. I'm going to sacrifice this card, so it gets put right into the graveyard. And I return a creature to its owner's hand. And I'm going to target this guy. Alright, so Goblin Electromancer comes back to my hand, because my ability gets to resolve first, because I responded to his move, and now Famine takes place on the battlefield. And he's just going to kill off my Hedron Scrabbler. Alright, so that gets put to the graveyard upon this spell resolving. Alright, so that set us back a little bit. However, we still have that Goblin Electromancer, so that's going to help us out quite well. Alright, so let's move back to my turn. Okay, so now it's my turn. My opponent was able to do some serious damage. He made me use up my Aether Spellbomb, and my Hedron Scrabbler is dead. It's in my discard pile. That's okay, though, because we were able to save Goblin Electromancer. Alright, so let's start our turn. Alright, we untap. Alright, everything gets untapped, ready to use for this turn. Okay, we have our upkeep. I see nothing referencing upkeep, so I don't need to do anything. And then I get to draw a card. Alright, so I drew another mountain. Excellent. So, let's start playing this out. I'm going to play a land first. I can play it later, but honestly, I like to put my lands out in the beginning so I don't forget. Alright, I want Goblin Electromancer to come back into play because I like that extra bonus of instants and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So I'm going to pay blue and red to put this guy out into play. Once again, Summoning Sickness, even though I already brought it out previously, it still counts as Summoning Sickness, so he can't attack this turn, but that's okay. What we are noticing, though, is we have 1, 2, 3 lands open, and the Goblin Electromancer is going to make Inspiration cost 1 less. So now Inspiration costs 2 colorless and a blue. So we're going to play that. But it's also worth noting, this is an instant, so we're going to be able to play it whenever we want. Alright, so, combat, we don't do anything. Second main phase, we're not going to do anything either. I want my opponent to think that maybe I have an instant sneaking in my hand that might change the battlefield. That way they're going to play a little bit more defensively, and hopefully I can slow them down. So we pass to my opponent. Alright, they do a couple things. Once again, this is a fictional opponent, but we can see basically how the play works. Alright, so they have their untap, their upkeep, their draw, their main phase goes, they don't attack with anything. They switch to their second main phase, they don't do anything, and then they say, I would like to pass my turn. Well, we say, before the end of your turn, I want to play this card. And the reason I want to play it now is so that during my turn, I will have these lands untapped, because it's not yet my untap step yet. So I'm going to pay the 2 colorless and the blue to play Inspiration. And I'm going to target myself, of course. I don't want to give my opponent more cards. That just would end up in my disadvantage. So I play it. It goes onto the field. All right, my opponent has nothing for it, so it resolves and goes to my discard pile. And I get to draw 2 new cards. A Phantom Warrior and a Pyrite Spellbomb. Excellent. So these are some cool cards. This is a 2/2 for 1 blue, and it's unblockable, meaning that it can't be blocked. So 2 damage is going to go through every single turn. And also we have the Pyrite Spellbomb. It's like the Aether Spellbomb, that blue one, except instead of returning a creature, it does 2 damage to target creature or player. Alright, so now it's my turn. Alright, so back to my turn. We just got that Inspiration going off, and we got some extra cards. And now we can see that during my untap step, all my lands are ready to go. So I got to kind of, not cheat out, but I got to advantageously play Inspiration and leave my lands open because I really want to play this guy. This guy is really, really powerful because he can't be blocked. I can start doing damage to my opponent's life, and they really can't do too much about it unless they have something that specifically takes care of it. Alright, untap, upkeep phase comes in, I don't do anything. Draw phase, I get to draw a card. Ooh, I got that equipment that we talked about earlier. So now, I'm going to make this Phantom Warrior even stronger when he's ready to attack. Alright, so now what we need to do is we need to start thinking strategically. Alright, we have a bunch of spells that we can play. I can make this unblockable creature ready to attack. I can make this flying creature ready to attack. I could change its creature type, but nothing's really helping me do that, so I'm not going to worry too much. I have a Pyrite Spellbomb. I have a lot of stuff that I can do, so I need to start thinking strategically. I do want to get this guy out because he can start attacking and doing some serious damage the following turn. Every turn I wait, I have to wait an additional turn before he can start launching an offensive. But I want to get this out. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the Bone Splitter, and I'm going to play it, and then I'm going to equip it onto the Goblin Electromancer, because that would make his power 4. Now my opponent can definitely play something to take care of it, but we might be trading creatures. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay a colorless. Remember, I want to keep these 2 blue open because this card needs to be played also during my turn. I'm going to pay the colorless and put Bone Splitter into play. Alright, I'm going to pay another colorless during my main phase to equip it onto this creature. So now Goblin or Electromancer is a 4/2. Alright, so now what we need to do is we need to launch our offensive, because we're going to end our main phase, and we're going to attack with it. Alright, so we'll be showing off the combat system. I'm going to put an imaginary creature under my opponent's control so that they can block and we can see some combat damage. Alright, so for this example, we're going to give our opponent a creature called Putrid Warrior. It's black and white for a 2/2, and when it deals damage, I can choose one. Each player loses 1 life, or each player gains 1 life. So I'm going to put this on my opponent's control over here. I'm going to inch this back a little bit. Alright, and we're going to declare Goblin Electromancer as an attacker. Why? Because I want to get rid of his creature. I would like to have him block, and if my opponent's going to block, that's going to be awesome. So I declare this as an attacker. It's a 4/2, so it deals 4 damage. My opponent looks at that and says, I don't want to take 4 damage. And my creature has 2 offense, so I can knock out that Goblin Electromancer. So my opponent's going to declare it as a blocker. Alright, it's going to block, so I'll bring these closer up so we can see them. Alright, so Goblin Electromancer is my attacker. He is tapped and attacking, and my opponent is blocking with Putrid Warrior. At the same time, each of these creatures deal damage equal to their power to each other's toughness. So this guy does 2 damage, and this guy does 4 damage. So they both kill each other. Alright, Putrid Warrior has a cool ability. It's a triggered ability. It starts with the word whenever. Whenever it deals damage, my opponent's going to choose that each player gains a life. Because my opponent's at 16 life, he wants to go up to 17, so we might as well put that in. I also gain a life too, so that kind of benefits me. But what happens is, this dies, and this dies. Alright, so I'm putting these back onto the battlefield. Alright, Goblin Electromancer dies. Now remember, equipment stays in play, but Putrid Warrior ends up dying and is removed from the environment. Alright, so in a way, I kind of played my opponent a little bit. I made it so that they don't have any creatures. Now I can start launching more of an offense. So during my second main phase, because combat is over, I'm going to pay blue, blue, and 1 to put Phantom Warrior into play. Now it would be nice if the equipment could attach to it, but I'm not allowed to do that unless I have the mana to equip it. Alright, so that's pretty much the end of my turn. I'll pass to my opponent's turn after that, and then we'll start our turn again. Alright, so back to my turn. Alright, I'm going to do my untap, my upkeep, nothing's referenced, and then I draw. Alright, so I drew a Kraken Hatchling. It's blue mana, and it's a 0/4, so it has no offensive capabilities, but this card is an excellent blocker. He has so much defense, and I can play him for just a blue mana. So, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pay 1 during my first main phase to equip the Phantom Warrior with the Bone Splitter. So now it is a 4/2 creature that is unblockable, or it can't be blocked. That's awesome. So the rest of the stuff I'm going to hold on to, because I'm not quite ready to play this stuff, because I want to hide information from my opponent. I'll switch to combat. Alright. And now, my turn, I'm going to declare, or during my combat, I'm going to declare Phantom Warrior as an attacker. Even if my opponent had creatures, it's not going to make much of a difference because, well, it's unblockable. So 4 damage knocks my opponent down to 13 life. Now here's where I'm going to get a little bit tricky with my stuff. So, I'm going to play Mistform Dreamer, because it's a flying creature, so that's more types of evasion or ways to get around my opponent. So I'm going to pay 1 and these 2 to play it. Alright, this is my second main phase, by the way. So now I have 2 creatures out. Now, I'm allowed to equip my creatures. And if my opponent has a creature that, maybe is a little bit stronger than my 2/1 flyer over here, I might be able to make that a more intimidating creature. I'm going to pay 1, and I'm going to move the equipment back onto Mistform Dreamer. And now it becomes a 4/1 flyer. Alright, so now it's got some offensive capabilities in case my opponent decides to attack with something powerful. Alright, and then during my next turn, I can re-equip it back onto Phantom Warrior. The only issue that I could see happening is that the Phantom Warrior, well, when I have to play to equip onto the Phantom Warrior, it's going to take more of my resources or my mana at the bottom. But I'm playing a little bit defensively right now, and for me, it's totally worth that cost. Alright, so we'll switch back to my opponent's turn. Okay, so we are back to my turn. Alright, we're going to do our untap, our upkeep. Nothing is referenced, so we don't need to worry about that. And we get to draw a card. Alright, so I got an Is It Charm. It has some cool abilities. Counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 2, or 2 damage to target creature, or draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. I'm going to hold on to this because that counter target non-creature spell, that can be very, very powerful later on. Alright, so I may notice that my opponent's creatures, they don't have flying, so that makes the Mistform Dreamer an unblockable creature as well. So I'm just going to leave the Bone Splitter on it because, well, hey, they have no creatures that can block its path, so it's pretty much unblockable. I don't want to waste my extra mana if I can, later on, utilize it for something else, like an Is It Charm, or even during my second main phase if I want to start putting out more cards. So I'm going to declare these as attackers once I switch to combat. Attack and attack. So now it does 2 damage plus 4 damage. My opponent can't block them, so it goes through. So 6 damage total. I believe that brings my opponent down to 9 from 17. Oh no, wait, they were at 17. They lost 4 the previous turn, so they went down to 13. And now this is another 6, brings them down to 7 life. Alright, fantastic. We are definitely launching a very powerful offensive. Alright, during my second main step, I want to start putting out stuff. I need a defense. Alright, so I'm going to play Kraken Hatchling. I'll pay the blue mana, and I'll put it into play. Now I have a 0/4 that's going to be nice and get in the way of my opponent's offenses. Alright, another thing that I want to put into play is the Pyrite Spellbomb. Maybe I want to do 2 damage to one of their creatures later on. Let's say they put out a flying creature next turn, and I can do some damage. So I'll pay 1, and I'll put it into play. So now I've got quite a battlefield full of stuff. And I also want to keep in mind I can save this red mana to use the Pyrite Spellbomb to either draw a card, or I can do 2 damage with it. And, in addition, I've strategically left a blue and a red for the Is It Charm as well. Alright, so let's pass to my opponent's turn, and we're going to see what it looks like when Is It Charm is used as a counter ability. Okay, so it is my opponent's turn, and they want to play a Terror. Even though it's an instant, they want to play it now to hopefully get rid of some of my stuff. So, they're going to play Terror, and they're going to target my Phantom Warrior. So they're saying, I play Terror, targeting Phantom Warrior, because that's part of the spell. You have to destroy target non-artifact, non-black creature, and it can't be regenerated. So as they declare it, alright, I have the ability to respond, just like anything else that we've seen. Alright, I'm going to pay the blue and the red, and I'm going to play Is It Charm, which is, I can choose any of these 3 abilities. I'm going to choose the first one. Counter target non-creature spell. Well, this is an instant, it's not a creature, so that's nice, unless its controller pays 2 colorless. For this example, let's just assume that my opponent has no untapped lands and no other resources for mana. So I'm going to play it, and it's going to go on something called the stack. So see how these things are kind of stacking on top of each other? They resolve in the reverse order. So what happens is, once everybody is done contributing to this particular chain of actions, then you start peeling away the cards one by one to resolve spells. So my Is It Charm gets resolved first. Alright, and I've chosen counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 2. Well, my opponent can't pay 2 for the Terror. So what happens is, this resolves, and it takes Terror and removes all of its effects from the game, and puts it immediately into their discard pile. So I have completely saved my creature thanks to Is It Charm. And that's why it's nice to keep these types of things open. Now, some could argue my opponent would have made a much better choice if they waited until I declared an attack, because then I would have been locked in with the Bone Splitter. But this is just an introductory level, so we're not going to go too deep into the theory of it. Also, I've exhausted all the cards in my hand. Which is fine, though, because my opponent is at 7 life. And right here with these 2, I can do 6 damage. But on top of that, I also have a Pyrite Spellbomb. Let's read what that says. I can pay red, sacrifice it. It does 2 damage to target creature or player. So I can do 2 damage to their life, bring them down to 5, and then these two can swing in for the win. Let's do that. Alright, so we'll shift to my turn. Okay, so my opponent decides they say, I'm going to pass turn to you. Well, I want to do something at the end of their turn. These type of abilities are called activated abilities because they have a colon with them, and I can use them whenever I want unless otherwise specified. So I can use this at the end of my opponent's turn. And let's do that because we want to free up our resources for later. Alright, so I'm going to pay red for Pyrite Spellbomb, sacrifice it to do 2 damage to my opponent's life points directly. So I say, pay red, sacrifice Pyrite Spellbomb, 2 damage to my opponent's life. They go down to 5 life. Ooh, look at that. This turn, I can swing in for the win. Alright, so now it's my turn. I untap, I check my upkeep, I don't need to do anything, and then I draw a card. Alright, not completely useful for this situation, but that's okay. It's a Darksteel Ingot. It's 3 mana. It's called a mana rock because basically it's an artifact that makes mana. It's indestructible, so it can't be destroyed, which is cool. It doesn't really help me in this particular situation, but that's alright. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it in my hand, because once again, I don't want my opponent to get any information. It's the end of the game, so it doesn't really matter too much, because I'm pretty sure I'm going to win, but in other situations, it may be beneficial to hide this information, as I've already discussed. So, my turn. Main phase, I will do nothing. I'll switch to combat phase. This is when I can declare my attackers. And I'm going to declare these two as attackers. Alright, a 2-1 flyer and a 2-2 unblockable, but that 2-1 flyer gets that boost. So this is doing 6 damage total. My opponent has no creatures to block it, so they say I can't declare a blocker, it looks like I lost. And damage is resolved. 6 damage brings my opponent to -1, and they are dead. Alright, so that's pretty much how a game of Magic could go. I know we've seen it very one-sided, but at least at this point, you know how to do the basic motions of the game. Alright, so your opponent's decks will definitely change the playing field a lot. Your opponents want to win as well, so they're going to have offensive cards. You're going to have cards, you're going to set up defenses, there's going to be strategy, there's going to be counter strategies, there's going to be a lot of stuff that's really going to change how this game is played. Alright, so this is Brian Fadouk. I hope you enjoyed watching this. I'll post a link to the tutorial as well, so you can start from there if you want to learn about the cards. But pretty much this is how a game would be played. The only things that I left out of this were enchantments and planeswalkers. But once again, if you go back to the rules and my discussions, you'll easily be able to figure out how to play it. Alright, so this is Brian Fadouk. Hope you guys enjoyed watching it. Sorry about that, someone's calling me. Alright. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, and comment. Hello and welcome to a tutorial for how to play Magic the Gathering. Throughout this series, we're going to learn how to play the game, different types of cards, a little bit about the history about it, strategies, and by the end of it, you'll understand how the card game is played. So, Magic the Gathering is composed of